have no idea why, but this live stream has been killing me this week. It like went up at 1 p.m. GST, which is 4 hours ahead of where I am, 5 hours ahead of Eastern time. So the original event got cancelled. Hopefully, we didn't lose anyone who was really keen to jump in. But if we did, don't you worry, because this recording is always going to be available afterwards on our YouTube channel, on our LinkedIn page, and also on our podcast page, Lavender Later, which with very little promotion is doing very well, I must say. I've been checking out the analytics. But enough about that. Let's jump into the topic today, which is all about being a player, coach, sales leader. And to help me break down this topic a little bit, because I've never done that job, I've brought in someone who has. My past colleague from a company called, where we worked together at a company called Proposify, where she was an SDR and ended up becoming this player coach. And I believe continue that on, but I want to hear more from her. Welcome to the stage, Gabby Siddle.
Hey, thanks
What's
so much
good?
for having me, Will.
No
I'm
worries.
excited.
I'm still having a hard. I almost called you Gabby Furlot for a second there. That's
I
a tough one to live
know.
up to.
Whole new me, Gabby Siddle now.
How are you doing, Gabby? What's keeping you busy these days?
Well, I've been with my new company, Slate, for I guess almost a year now. In the player coach role, so having a lot of fun there with the team, in the trenches with them. But yeah, just super excited to connect back with you, my old colleague, and yeah, chat with others here.
I don't need to ask this. I was going to say, did you miss me? But I already know the answer to that. It's a
Yeah,
resounding no.
so much.
Awesome. I'd love to hear from you, like a breakdown of what that looks like. So I'm right in thinking you're currently in one of the a role where you are individually contributing towards a target, but also then
Mhm.
managing and coaching a team of sellers. Is that right?
Yeah, so we've got a team target that I contribute to. But yeah, so I guess like to give some background, I started, as you know, in the SDR role at Proposify. And actually, when I first started in the SDR role, I was really wanting to get into the AE role, like most SDRs. I think that's kind of like what you assume you'll jump into after. But luckily, our old boss, Dan, shout out, he really saw that I had a lot of like managerial and like leadership characteristics. So he sort of gave me that push into the team lead role. And I guess now it's been 2-ish years of doing that, one at Proposify and one at Slate. So yeah, I've been liking it a lot so far.
Okay, that's a great context. So I've heard. Could you give me a breakdown of like how on a day-to-day basis that actually looks like? What does that role entail? How are you breaking up your time as both that contributing to that goal, but also then helping the sellers?
hmm Yeah, so I think to be in this player coach team lead role, like you've got to be really great with time management. So the way I break it up is I'm kind of lucky where most of my SDRs they're in a different time zone than me, so they sign on a little bit later in my day. So my mornings, I just kind of tell myself like this is my SDR time. Like this is the time where I'll prospect, I'll do my cold outreach, build accounts, build lists, that kind of thing. And then once I hit around like 11 in the morning, like that's when I switch gears and I'm like, okay, like taking the SDR hat off. Now I'm just in my manager hat. Um, and I found it at first like hard to make that shift. But you've just got to be basically like married to your calendar and dedicated to um, like protecting your time and distributing it kind of, I would say, like equally. It might depend on how many SDRs you manage too. I've got four, so I find that like half and half time works pretty well for me.
That is interesting because the next question I want to ask you is like, do you think this model is a good model, and where do you think it might not work? So, is there a plan for you to move into is your goal to move into a full time leadership position at some stage?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would like to eventually, like, I am kind of full-time managing now. However, yeah, like hopefully I can maybe do a little less prospecting. However, on that same token, I do think it's important for, SDR managers and even like just sales managers, AE managers to sort of like always be prospecting. Like it's not just for junior reps to do, like it's not their responsibility. Like at Slate, our co-founders are prospecting too. So, what people say about sales being a team sport, um, I want to make sure like I continue that just like throughout my manager experience in the future. But yeah, I can imagine if I'm ever overseeing 10, 20 reps that I'm not going to be able to put that same time aside. So I have to make some shifts,
I love
then.
that coach you just described, because too often do you speak to a sales leader and you're like, "Oh, when was the last time you closed a deal?" And they start telling you a story about, you know, well, I was using my BlackBerry and I
Oh
sent you a
God.
text." You're like, "Okay, all right." So I love that you're keeping your teeth sharp so you can stay keep your ear to the ground. A lot of sales leaders get disconnected from what it is like to sell in modern times, which I think can only
Mhm.
help you coach better as well. Um,
Yeah.
let's say someone's out there, they're in an SDR role, maybe they're in an AE role, because I've seen a few of these player coach roles work for AE teams as well.
Mhm.
What would you say are the steps that person should be taking? You mentioned that our previous manager Dan told you had some leadership kind of traits. What steps did you take to pursue that role?
Well, right away, I got super involved with hiring and onboarding. So we had just onboarded a new SDR, um, and then we're looking to hire another one. So I sort of helped recreate what our SDR onboarding program looked like, and then cultivated that boot camp, and really like just took on like coaching that person, and then also like got in the weeds of like helping to hire our next SDR as well. So it kind of like worked out timing wise for me, but the advice I'd also give for other, SDRs looking to get into the team lead role is to take things off your manager's plate and
Mhm.
try not to get in the habit of asking them like, hey, like, what else can I do? What else can I do? Like, try and come up with those ideas on your own, whether it's maybe your manager spends a lot of time creating sequences. And maybe that's something like you can take on yourself now that you've probably got a year or two experience doing that.
Yeah.
Um, anything that you can do that basically makes your manager's life easier, that's going to help get you promoted and get to that next step quicker.
I love that, because when you come to someone and say, "Hey, what can I do for you?" You're actually kind of giving them another task by having to allocate something to you. The proactive
Yeah.
approach is really good. What's what would you say has been the biggest challenge from moving to an IC to a leadership coaching manager role?
I would say for me, it's like just the fact that other people depend on you a lot more, especially, um, luckily for me, like I had a lot of great people that invested a lot of their time into making me a really great SDR. And I want to make sure I'm, giving that same time that to my SDRs. I think they deserve that. Um, so I think just like balancing that, whereas like, when you're an SDR, yeah, your AEs and the rest of the revenue team depend on you to bring in new deals. But like you at the end of the day, like your target is kind of your own, whereas like this is more like, okay, we need to make sure we're working together as a team because even if one person is like totally crushing it, like you still need to focus putting your like efforts and training into the others so it might not be like at that same level too.
That's really interesting as a challenge. You mentioned that you got some really good coaching from folks to help you get to where you are today. Some of those leadership skills. What are some things what are some places or things that you've tried to learn to improve those leadership skills? Because obviously you had the sales skills, but
Mhm.
not every seller can translate directly to being a good manager. We all know that story.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found super tough in the beginning was having performance conversations. Like it's always easy when someone's performance is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but then like, once it's not and you want to bring up your concerns, but you still also want to make sure that your team trusts you and can go to you like when they maybe when someone's not doing as well. So I just found like navigating those conversations kind of tough. Um, so I actually just would ask like in my network, either like my managers or other SDR managers in my network, and just sort of say like, hey, like word for word, like how do you have these conversations? Um, and that really helped me out a lot. So I'd recommend to like for anyone that's struggling in your new team lead or manager role, like just reach out to other people because people like especially salespeople love giving advice. So if you're asking for it, like I'm sure you're gonna find people that are willing.
That's such a great tip, really for anything in sales as well. Other sellers love to brag about what's been working for them as well.
Yeah.
And I've never said no to anyone who's not come to me and asked me for a little bit of advice,
Mhm.
unless it's automated, in which case I'm often being sold to. Um, what was I going to ask? Someone said in the comments, what do you think success looks like in a role like yours?
um, I think it depends like what stage your team is at. Like if you've got a lot of newer reps, or maybe it's like a lot of reps that are more seasoned, I guess. But obviously, like one measure of success is your team hitting your team quota. Um, but I think other measurements are like I don't know, maybe these aren't really things you can quantify, but having others, whether it's other people on your team, like the SDRs or AEs or other sales managers, like come to you for advice, or like you can tell that they value your opinion. um, I think like that makes me feel at least like validated. So that makes me think I'm okay, I must be doing a pretty good job and must be like kind of successful if other people are asking like for my advice. Yeah, I don't know. Small measurements, I guess.
Well, there's definitely obviously the success in sales is pretty quantitative, but the qualitative feedback
Mhm,
is stuff that we need to pay attention to as well. You mentioned earlier that the team goal, that's the kind of like the main, if we're booking enough meetings, we're generating enough pipeline and closing enough deals, that's
mhm.
the North Star for most sales teams. You, as someone who contributes to that goal, do you have your own separate personal goal, or is that something you just kind of assume the ownership over to contribute towards the team goal?
I don't have my own personal goal. However, um, in like previous role, I did. So I think like in my first maybe 6 months of being a team lead in my previous role, like I did have my own personal goal, and it was like it was pretty small. Like it wasn't like a full quota. Um, and then like once my team got bigger, we basically just took away my quota and made it like a team quota. And probably made it bigger. I don't remember, but anyways, yeah. So right now, I just contribute to the team goal, which I think is a really good setup for team leads because that way, like I can help my SDRs prospect accounts that they're focused on, and I
Mm,
have no problem with like let's just say like they happen to respond to my email, even though the other SDR has been reaching out to like 10 other people in this account. I have no problem with giving them all the credit for it because at the end of the day, like I really just care about the team quota,
yeah.
and it's kind of my job to help the team book meetings and do what they can to get there. So, you know, helps make it so you don't have like a greedy sales manager. 'Cause that's that's not what I want to be.
That was what was running through my mind as one of the questions I wanted to ask. Like, are you competing with your own team in that sense? But I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head by saying that you own that team goal and it's in your best interest to contribute to that, but not necessarily the best interest to take
Yeah.
the credit for it. I love that. What's I got to know as someone who's both in the trenches and managing a team, what are you seeing working really well right now for the outbound side of things? I know this is like a little off topic,
Um,
but I'm curious.
yeah, I think it's funny. in my previous role, like we were super focused on cold calling. So it was definitely a big switch coming into Slate where just our audience is different. I'm not saying you can't cold call into our audience, but we don't do as much cold calling before. Like we're not doing like the 100 calls a day type of prospecting. Um, the thing that works most best for us, I think, is doing some actual research on the accounts you're going after and making your messaging a little more tailored. Not saying it has to be 100% personalized, but you need to make it relevant. And also just on we're doing a lot of social selling like through LinkedIn too. Um, and I really try and keep in mind, like, let's just have a conversation first. Like, let's just, get to know each other in the first few messages because it can be so exciting. Like, when you finally get that, like, VP level, whoever it is you're trying to reach out to, and they finally accept you and, like, reply to a message to want to, like, pitch right away to them. Like, I've done that 100 times, thousands of times, but that doesn't really work 9 times out of 10. So I think just, like, slowing your roll down and just being more human first, will actually help build, just more genuine connections, but also, like, give you a little bit more, like, street cred, I guess. Like, you're not there to just, like, connect and pitch and sell right away.
So doing your research, focus on the relationship, focus on the conversation rather than going straight for the
Mhm,
throat and trying to book that meeting. And when you're coaching your team, let's say I'd be curious. You mentioned earlier, like one of the things that you've had to have conversations about is um, low performance. And that was one of the harder challenges that you had stepping into leadership.
mhm.
How do you go about coaching your sellers, both from like if they know that they need coaching in a certain area, but also identifying areas where they can improve? Like, what's how, I'm going to stop there so I don't ask a multi questions. I've been doing that a lot. Um, let's start there. How do you figure out where sellers need help?
Usually I'll look at it kind of on a team basis first. Like we do have a recurring kind of like cold outreach training biweekly meeting with all the reps, the SDRs and AEs. So if we're not booking many meetings through LinkedIn, like I'll try and focus the conversation around that, sort of give them refresher tips. Um, so that's usually like on the team basis, like just trying to look for trends, like how are we booking the majority of our meetings? Maybe 3 months ago we were booking a ton through email and now like not really at all. So just try and like keep, tabs on that. But then when it comes to someone individually, like, I usually try and ask in their one-on-ones, like, "Hey, like, what do you feel is working? What do you think is not working?" And because it makes it easier to coach someone when you can get them to come to you with the problem, because I'm sure many of you have heard, like, that expression, "I'm gonna mess it up," but it's like you tell someone to do someone 1,000 times, they're they're not gonna do it, but if, like, somehow they think it's their idea or maybe it's, like, someone else,
Yeah.
not like their manager kinda gives them, like, that bug in the ear, then it's gonna resonate a little bit more. So I try and yeah, just like steer the conversation into like getting the individuals to realize like what's going on.
What are some techniques that you use to get them there? Because you said you can't just tell them, right?
Yeah, usually it's just like questioning, what do you think the problem is? Oh my gosh, there's this book. I think it's The Coaching Habit. Maybe. I don't know. If anyone's actually interested, just DM me on LinkedIn and I'll actually find the book. But anyways, someone recommended that book to me and it's got these like questioning techniques that really get like the rep to go below surface level on their problems. So it's really just like giving them the space to sort of like ramble on about what they think is the problem. And then like you kind of go a layer deeper and say, like, okay, and what else? Like, what have you tried? Um, what do you think we should work on? And then it just makes your conversation a little deeper in the one on ones.
I and I'm sure you'll relate to this. I can think of a manager that we had a proposal for who was really good at this, and I always appreciated it. And it can sound like, manipulation, but it is not. It's kind of like I know that I'm kind of stubborn, a lot of sellers are, and
Mhm.
if it comes to the answer on my own, I'm much more likely to act on it versus then like, hey, you should do it my way. It's like they ask the right questions, and in that way, it's very similar to sales and like discovery, right? You ask the
Yeah.
right questions to a prospect, you can almost help them realize, oh, this is the problem here. Right? Here's a potential way to solve it.
Mhm.
What Sorry, I went off on one and now I've dropped it. I got the right book there, The Coaching Habits, Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever, that I've pinned at the bottom of the screen there. Is that the right one? By Michael
Yes, yeah,
Brandes
that
and
is it.
Chandler. Awesome. I just I'll get that on I've got so many paperback. Are there any other resources like you mentioned that book? You mentioned talking to your
Mhm.
network. Are there any other things that you've actively sought out and found really helpful to help you develop as a leader?
Um, I've I've read quite a few books and listened to not even just sales podcasts, but just podcasts on like where the topics around leadership, um, or just like search up. But really, I found the most helpful thing is like I've made LinkedIn posts that say like, "Hey, is there any SDR managers that like have experience with X topic?" Like maybe it's with onboarding new hires or something. Um, and then with that, you get tons of SDRs trying to sell you whatever solution that they're trying to sell you. But I've also made a lot of really genuine connections, um, that now I've got like reoccurring invites with a lot of these people, whether it's like a quarterly basis or whatever it is, where we can it's just nice to have like a community that you can go to. Like maybe there's something like frustrating going on, or like someone else is trying a new experiment that like inspires me to do something similar.
Yeah,
So that's really like connecting with others in similar roles, like is the thing that's most inspiring to me and where I find I get the most value. And I know you can do that through like LinkedIn groups too. Like there's Pavilion and I don't know. There's tons of them. I can't even think of them right now.
that makes sense. I'm curious. After your step into leadership, now that you've got the manager title,
Mhm.
uh, have you noticed an uptick in the number of people trying to prospect you?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So
How
many.
how has that changed the way you think about sales? Are you seeing anything differently now that you're in the shoes of a buyer?
Um, yeah, I used to tell myself when I was an SDR, like, I'm never going to ghost an SDR once I'm a manager, and I'm always going to reply and give valuable feedback. Um, that was a lie. I'm not the person that I was hoping I would be. However, when I can tell that someone has put in the effort to look me up, like maybe I'm sure maybe after this I'll get someone that says like, "Hey, saw you in Will's live," and whatever. Like that's the type of message like I will respond to, because I feel like that they're trying to genuinely connect with me first. Rather, and I obviously can tell like if they're gonna like if I just take a look at their profile, like I know they're eventually their end goal is to sell to me, which is fine. But yeah, and sometimes too, like if I look up someone that prospected me, I might give them a little feedback, but definitely not to the person that's I'm just in their sequence, like no personalization, no like anything really. So those ones I'll ghost them sometimes by accident. One thing I have noticed though too is a lot of SDR emails are going into my spam folder. So I guess just like one tip, and the common theme I'm kind of seeing is like for those ones, a lot of them have like links, or they're like super long emails. So maybe SDRs out there, I would maybe take those out of your first email and condense it a little bit more because they could be going to the spam folders.
What's the Okay, that's awesome. And I mean, oftentimes those ones that I see in my spam are the most automated ones. So I think
Mhm,
sometimes that volume issue can shoot you in the foot as well. If you're sending 300, 500 emails in a short period of time, then oftentimes that will help mean that you get flagged as spam. I never see a good email in my spam folder that's personalized, if you know what I mean.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's interesting. When you okay, right? So I'm curious about this, right? Because I think a lot of those things are symptoms of like reps being told to do more activity. You've already told me what's working for you, which is like a really thoughtful kind of. Sometimes you've done some research, or maybe you've segmented your list in a good way. When you're thinking about activity, because every seller has had the manager who's like all about KPIs. How,
Mhm.
how have you walked around that conversation?
Um, it's funny, I have this one SDR who her activity is generally lower than everyone else. However, um, she books the most meetings. Last week or last month, I'm pretty sure she was over 200% of her quota.
All
So,
right, we're
um,
gonna need to see some of these
I
DMs and
know.
emails.
Yeah, she's unreal. But yeah, so I don't know. I think it's you need to like in the beginning of your SDR role, get your activity up and just get kind of used to that muscle of like always prospecting, um, and just like learn how to do that. But yeah, I would say like it's important to slow it down. If you're a manager and you're super focused on, the activity level, and if you've been kind of working that strategy for a long time and you're not near quota, you're probably going to have to readjust because, there's so many SDRs out there and like there's whoever your ICP is, like they're getting tons of sales emails every day. So I think it's like important to just slow it down a little bit. And just like make your touch points more meaningful too. Um, so yeah, I think the days of just the spray and pray are over and dead. And I don't think that makes people like necessarily better salespeople too. Like, what are you really learning from like just like account building and like putting 200 people in a sequence every week? Like, it can, I don't know. That's kind of tough. So usually, if I have a rep that's sort of doing that and it's like not working for them, um, then I would probably just like sit down with them and talk about how we need to readjust our strategy here.
I love that. A lot of sellers, sellers and sales leads, I think, are yet to make that realization as well, based on the
Mhm.
emails I'm seeing in my inbox. Um, I want to finish this off with what's next. So you mentioned when you first were an SDR, you really wanted to become an AE, but then
Mhm.
you had a leader tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you've got some great leadership traits. You know what you're talking about. You communicate really well, and you should try to lead the team." Now that you've done that a little bit, how has that changed where you want to go in the long run? Have you thought about your goals for what comes after this?
It's funny, like I really love management and I want to continue down this path for now. However, I kind of feel like, especially in SaaS, tech sales, there's so many avenues, and I kind of just want to try them all at some point. So I'm not saying I'll never be an AE, and I think the skills that I have, as like an SDR and manager, like they're still very applicable to the AE role. So who knows? Like maybe I'll go switch to that at some point. Like I have AEs reaching out to me about like SDR roles too. So I think there's not really like one linear path when it comes to like your sales SaaS career.
Mm,
Um, I think it's like kind of a fun space where you can jump all over the map if you wanted to, and especially if you're the type that likes to learn all the time too.
yeah, I'm confident. Whatever you decide to do, you can absolutely crush it, Gabby. You're a real one. Before we finish off here, is there anything you'd like to plug, or yeah, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Honestly, I would just love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Let me know if you tuned in, and yeah, let's just let's just start the conversation there and see where it takes us. Thanks, Will.
Absolutely welcome, Gabby. Thanks so much for jumping on. And next time I might be able to get the live stream working. So, as I mentioned, everyone, if you did miss this or you're just catching, you came in halfway because you only got the notification because I only just made this event. You can watch this all on YouTube, on LinkedIn, or again on Spotify, wherever, as a podcast format as well. Thanks so much, Gabby.
Thanks, Will. See you, everyone.